Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our declaration on women's sex-based rights. It's been signed by 34,714 people from 160 countries and is supported by 486 organisations. We have over 100 volunteer activists, including 53 country contacts, engaged in defending women's rights. And we would love it if you would join us as a volunteer. I'm really pleased to say that today we have Amie Ichikawa from the US. The title of her talk is Encirclement Tactics Against Female Erasure. Then we're going to hear from Tania from Gender Dissent from Canada, Finding Each Other Through the Movement. And then after that, we're going to have two videos which have been pre-recorded. They're from the Radical Feminist Conference in Brisbane, Australia. And they are Samara, who is a trans widow, and Janet Fraser, who's going to talk about who said self-ID would be a good idea. Our first speaker, which is Amie Ichikawa, she is formerly incarcerated and is doing everything she can to empower, encourage, and educate women in prison so they will fight against our erasure on the front lines inside. What is happening is so much worse than any of us could have imagined. So thank you so much, Amie, for speaking to us, and over to you.
The reason why I chose the encirclement is because I've been studying World War I and II old tactics. I figure it was a good idea because this is the war, quite literally, that we're in. And the encirclement tactic stood out because it could be translated to something that we could all do that isn't necessarily hand-on-hand combat. This is something that can be interpreted in a way to act just exactly where we are. Even the women inside can participate in this fully. So encirclement is when you're attacking the opposition from multiple perspectives. Multiple angles. The women inside have to shoulder so much of this, specifically because they are on the front lines. They're in the middle of this. They're having to sleep with the enemy every single night. So what I'm doing is trying my hardest to encourage them, educate them, and empower them. And I'm going to explain what that looks like. Hi, Barbara. These women are very downtrodden. They've been abandoned by our government. Sometimes their families. There's women inside that some of them have made me like their power of attorney. They don't have anyone. So it's extremely important that I'm able to provide them with the kind of encouragement they need to know that they are valuable and that despite being incarcerated, they still matter. So I do my best to do that within my means by constantly encouraging them. They've also been robbed of their femininity, their ability to exist as women. You know, you get into the prison and you're stripped of everything unless you're trans-identified. They strip you of your name, you become a number. You wear a uniform that is the same uniform that the men wear. It's difficult. So I send in things to remind them that they are women, that they are beautiful women that matter. So even if it's something as small as a sparkly hair clip or I don't know, things that smell good, because when you live life void of things that smell good, it's really impactful. It has a really it does something to you mentally. I remember the first time I smelled something good, it had been a couple of years and I didn't understand how important that is. It seems irrelevant on a day-to-day basis, but when you haven't smelled good in a couple of years, it really makes it a reality. How small things like that are very comforting and do remind us, what the essence of ourselves is. So I do those things, and in addition to that, I try and really drive home the fact that they have to get active. I hate having to ask them to do what they have to do because they are already shouldering so much. But I think our existence as women in general is very much dependent on them not compromising or bending or submitting to this agenda. They're so tired. But I've done my best to continually communicate this point to them that we're depending on them. We're very much depending on their ability to stay in the fight and to stay focused and to get uncomfortable, as if they're not already uncomfortable enough, but they're going to have to make some more sacrifices. They're going to have to give up those contraband pajamas and their double mattresses, and they're going to have to be willing to get uncomfortable to get some of their rights restored, and to ensure that the agenda that's taking place inside never comes out here. Because I'm quite sure that what's happening inside, a lot of us on this side of the wall would probably not be able to handle this. There's a lot of things that I leave out regularly to spare the rest of you from what's happening. I do share a lot, but it's so disturbing and so horrific that I choose to leave specific things out. And I do that just because I don't think everybody has to be poisoned with the depravity and the true sickness of what is behind this whole effort to erase us. For example, I wanted to encourage the ladies inside to read The Art of War. And they told me we already have it because our state-issued tablets came preloaded with it. So if you can wrap your mind around how demented that is, really, that the state would have already issued that to them without asking, without, how does that happen? It's very intentional. It's so intentional. I don't know how to explain, because I don't think I know fully how big and how sinister this plan really is. I think it's been in action for a long time, and none of us have known because it's the most evil genius plan ever. And I think this is how we're going to combat it. So this is in the second slide I have, there's 7 securities. There's 7 human securities. And I think this tactic can be used also with parents of the ROGD children. This is kind of a tool that you can use for helping people that are coming out of like a cult-like situation, people that have very Stockholmish kind of symptoms. If we can ensure that they have these, or a semblance of the 7 securities, it's really helpful. I believe that if I can get as much of these securities locked in for the women, it's going to be that much easier for them to stand up, submit complaints, exhaust their administrative actions so that we can start filing more lawsuits. Economic security, I do my best to make sure that if they're destitute, if they're indigent and they have nothing, that there are at least people around them that can make sure they have food security. For example, one of the ladies, actually Tamikia, she never asked for anything. She never wants for anything. She's very hard on herself. And she was very, very sad recently. She lost another grandparent. So this is her third since she's been incarcerated. And as simple-minded as this sounds, sending her a quarterly package that was full of food, full of, treats and snacks and just things that are comforting when you're in this environment, cheered her up. I knew she needed it too, because she never says yes. She never says yes, and she said yes almost instantly. These are the kind of things that are just going to keep them sustained long enough to get them to the point where they know and feel safe to stand up. Health security, what I've started doing lately is calling the prison medical staff, their CFOs, all kinds of people when people are having issues medically. They've started butchering the women who've decided to identify as trans. The healthcare is so poor as it is. But what they've done now is a contract with, I think, maybe the worst plastic surgeon in Southern California to do these mastectomies, and they're kicking them out of the hospital before, prematurely. There's a woman who contacted me, and she had an artery nicked during her mastectomy, and the doctor didn't tell the prison, so I had to, because they didn't want to, they're not going to see you for anything medically that isn't on record. And they didn't care that she was bleeding out. She now has an infection. It's just, it's horrendous. But that, calling, checking up, letting these people know that there is somebody and some buddies on the outside that are advocating and care about these women makes a big difference. That one phone call can get them, the antibiotics they might need to survive. I'm doing my best to make sure that nobody lines up for phalloplasty. I'm sending in photos as much as I can without being flagged of the tragedy that occurs when this happens, that they were never going to function correctly, that this is not necessary. This is experimental. So imagine what the prison is going to do. They almost did a biopsy on the wrong breast the other day of a friend. So I try to express to them, I really wouldn't trust them to make, a new genital for you. But they are in an echo chamber. They are very limited as far as information goes. So ensuring that they have as much information available in regards to their health is something I'm doing as well. And that's not exclusive to people getting double mastectomies. There's women down the hall that actually need mastectomies that are not getting adequate health care. There's a woman whose spine is bending because she needs a breast reduction. And they told her, no, this would be considered cosmetic. So I kind of fell off for a couple of days after that, because it just makes it a reality of how much they really, really really hate us. But moving forward, the personal security, I think, happens with the encouragement, the contact, the postcards. We started a postcard campaign. One of my partners, Liz, who is a former life without the possibility of parole woman, who served almost 25 years, I think. She had a great idea because I made postcards, but they were a little bit scary and depressing. You know, what is DARVO? What is gaslighting? Because those terms are essential for them to understand. But she made they're a little more handy. They've come in very, very handy in emergency situations, situations where they would require grounding, situations where they need to be able to immediately comfort themselves because it is so shocking and scary when they're faced with a situation where they feel like their heart's going to explode because, you know, one of the people are coming, one of the men are coming, or they're being intimidated, or they can't cope because they have to see another person getting beaten by their new boyfriend that the state issued. They keep the postcards taped to the outside of their lockers to remind themselves these are the things that we do when we're freaking out. And if you guys have any suggestions of techniques or words of wisdom, we would be happy to put those on postcards and send them into. That's also the fastest way of communication. It's going to take us a couple of years before we can fully develop curriculum and actually get it in without it being deemed as propaganda. So postcards are extremely effective right now. Community security, that's a little bit more complex because we struggle with that too. Oh, state issued boyfriends, you know, the trans identified individuals have all gotten into relationships. It is very disturbing, but that's what they're going over there for. And recently I've learned that they're not just sleeping with and raping the women, but they're sleeping with each other. So these are extremely unwell, deviant individuals. So there's that. That was very disturbing, and I had to take a time out. That was a tough bit of information to process last week. But again, back to the community security, trying to make sure that everyone is, there's a lot of STDs now. Trying to make sure that everyone understands that we have to put other issues on the back burner. We have to put differences to the side, especially now, more so than ever, because we have to fight together. We can't show weaknesses. I tell them regularly, you can't show emotion. They're going to hold this against you and use it to destroy you. And it's just showing chinks in the armor. So the best way to combat that is to just firmly stand shoulder to shoulder and not let them through. Flat affect, stone face, don't respond, don't react. Even if you're angry, even if you have every right to be angry, don't give them the satisfaction of knowing that you're bothered, because they're going to put that in a file and remember, oh, this is what really bothers her. This is how I'm going to tear these two powerful people apart. And this is what's constantly happening. We're giving them a playbook on how to break us down and keep us separated. It's the same thing here. There's always going to be things we disagree on. But if we don't primarily focus on those things and focus on the things we do agree on, and the war that we have to, fight in order to survive, it's just going to be a lot smoother. there's no way that we can do this as individuals anyway. I mean, we're all doing our individual part in this action, but there still has to be that unity, that togetherness, in order to power through this. Political security, I don't know if we're ever going to have that again. Well, we will. I don't want to say it's impossible, but that's something I can't really do for them inside too much. That's their responsibility. They've got to stay active on the inmate advisory councils, which is also in danger very much right now, as the recent report that came out was insinuating that the trans people needed more representation on the council. Right now it's divided by race. There's a female a lady representative for Black, white, Hispanic, and other. Now what's going to happen, what I'm quite sure will happen, is that the transfers, the men will take the obviously trans chair from the panel or from the council, and then they'll start taking over the race seats, and then they will do their best to control the entire advisory council. So they really have to fight that. They're doing a great job. It hasn't happened yet, but I do predict in the near future that's going to be part of the plan of action. That speaking of plan of action, I would like to also say this is how disturbing, how, this isn't just a physical assault. This is a full, like, mental, psychological warfare type of situation. When the men first got there, they would see each other in passing and they would say, "Stick to the plan." And women would message me and say, "What's the plan? What's the plan?" And I can't tell them because I don't know, but I know it's big and it's bad. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing that they're planning for us on this side. So we just have to continue pushing forward and doing everything we can to encourage each other and build each other up and build the ranks. There's probably tons of women that you don't necessarily get along with. I'm going to tell you that there's a serial killer that I really can't stand, but I have to care about her just as much as I care about Tamikia or Michelle. She was recently, she was in a relationship with one of the men who just hates my guts, hates Lauren too. Has written a few very disturbing articles about how we need to be identified, purged, and replaced. Well, the serial killer got into a relationship with this guy, and he was choking her out a couple of weeks ago, and staff had to come in and remove him, and they moved him from that honor dorm to the next honor dorm without disciplinary action, without reprimand or anything. So they said she wants to talk, and I don't want to talk to her, but I'm going to, because that's just the way we got to do things now. Going back to how this can happen or how this is going to look on our side is, yes, Lauren from Wolf or from Jackson Bone, is that you might have like an irritating neighbor who, just bought a KitchenAid mixer and loves Dylan Mulvaney, but you're going to have an opportunity to talk to her at some point, and you have to take advantage of every single opportunity that you get, because every time you talk about it and raise an awareness about what's happening, you're giving a voice back to one of the voiceless. And I don't just mean the women in prison, but to the women out here who can't speak either, who are not at liberty to be as free and bold as some of us. There's people who are just as oppressed out here as the women are inside. So there's so many voices that need to be restored, and that can be one conversation at a time. And I know it's uncomfortable and people are going to call you a weirdo and it sucks to be judged, but these are things that we have to sacrifice, because just keep in mind what the women inside are giving up to make sure that that evil plan doesn't come out here. So after, I get these 7 securities locked down. I think it's going to be a constant process. It's going to be something that happens forever. These women can go ahead. I'm hoping, this is my hope, are going to feel confident, comfortable, safe, and empowered enough to start writing their inmate complaints, because right now they're afraid to even ask for the forums because of retaliatory actions from the staff, and the men find out and they just start plotting against you. So I need them to not care, just boldly go forward, get that complaint, file it, and exhaust it, because they can't file any lawsuits until the administrative what do they call them? Until that's fully exhausted. That process takes a year. So if they start today, if they start right now, and we start getting all of these complaints submitted, we can get lawsuits. But in order for them to even want to do that, they have to know that there's lawyers who care, who are going to want to do this and not make me sell my soul to retain them. If there are lawyers that could take one pro bono case a year, or encourage their colleagues to do the same, it would really get us some action, because this is going to have to take place in the court system. We have to fight back. Instead of, I've given up trying to change the system. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. We have to learn it and use it like they do. And what the trans have done is really bolster their community, and gotten all this money from all these payouts, all these settlements. And this is how they have perpetuated this. This is how they've grown in numbers, and this is how they support each other. So what would it look like if we did that? They're never going to see that coming, because they think that we're idiots. So I'm just going to keep smiling and nodding and studying their playbook and applying it to our own situations. Because this has to be law. This has to be something that's on the books everywhere. So that's pretty much the technique that I've decided if we're going to go with for now, because I've tried them all in the last 2 years. I started with just screaming and running quickly. And it worked initially, but I think I've graduated, and it's time to start thinking more tactically and limit the moves that I personally make, to make sure that they're like death blows. It has to completely knock out one of their efforts, because the board just feels like it's getting smaller and smaller. So being tactical, making sure we keep our plays off of the front lines, like don't divulge all the secrets on Twitter or Facebook. We've got to have meetings like this to ensure this isn't information for everybody to know, because everything we do, they will use against us. So this is perfect. This is exactly where these kind of tactics need to be shared. They'll eventually figure it out, but if we can get some distance between now and the next action, it's going to pay off. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what I need help with.
So we're going to hear from our second panelist, Tania from Gender Dissent. So Tania's from Canada. She's a member of the Gender Dissent team. She's going to talk to us. The title of her talk is Finding Each Other Through the Movement. So thank you so much, Tania, and over to you.
Thank you for having me on to talk about gender dissent. which is our online magazine about the resurgent women's movement against gender identity ideology in Canada. I'm just going to call it genderism, if that's okay. So yeah, my name is Tania. In 2017, I was listening to the CBC radio. That's our national public broadcaster. I was listening to a radio program called The Current. The host of The Current is this journalist of great renown, like we trust her implicitly, right? And she was interviewing the woman who ran the Vancouver Rape Relief and Women's Shelter, Hilla Kerner. She was interviewing her about their policy to provide services to women only, right? It seems pretty uncontroversial. Well, it seemed like it in 2017. So Anna Maria Tremonti, this wonderful host, was actually grilling Hilla Kerner and very challenging. It was almost obnoxious. It was like she was trying to shame her. And, I thought that was so weird. Like I couldn't figure it out. It was too weird. Anyhow, so I investigated it a bit, and I asked around and, sure enough, I discovered that, okay, I am a cis, that my kid is being shown TV shows at school that teach her that some boys are actually girls. And, she's got to shove over and make room for them. That, men with genders can, for example, put on roller skates and join the roller derby, and they can just, body check women at speed. And that, if I have a problem with these things, then I'm the troublemaker, right? Like, you couldn't make it up. So our Canadian legacy media, it was just all over the place promoting only one story about, genderism. And, it wasn't the story from the women's perspective or the children's perspective or society's perspective. It was just a shocking betrayal. Okay, so with one thing and another, but honestly, no ambitions or illusions of being any kind of, investigative journalist or even a writer of any kind, I joined a group of women to see if we could spread the word about genderism, which seemed, to be a real threat to us. And we made the website Gender Dissent to address the subject that, our legacy media was just like totally not acknowledging. First, our group of women, we were only sort of united in the movement, right? Like we weren't doing any kind of investigating or writing or website work professionally, but we figured that, we probably had what it took to sort of produce our own kind of samizdat, right? Just good enough, better than nothing, So what we do is we kind of learn on the go and we contribute wherever we can, right? And now we have, I guess, more than 72 articles up in both languages. We have English and French, they're national languages. And we have work translated into other languages on other kind of foreign websites. Maybe I haven't said it. Our website is GenderDissent.com. I want to say that we're supported by the women of the CAUSEBAR network. CAUSEBAR is the Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. They're our sister group, maybe, twin sister group. We're quite close. Those women, they read and they share, and, they even write for us. They translate for us. They're amazing, and we love and we value them. And, certainly any Canadian women or women in Canada, right? You don't have to be a Canadian national, who want to get involved with Gender Dissent or CAUSEBAR, I welcome you to reach out. It's kind of you leave your politics and ideologies at the door and, come on and help out kind of thing. But it's really worth it. So now I'd like to play our little video that we made just kind of while we were learning about how to make these little videos. It's just a montage of a few of our articles, but we thought it was okay, good enough, right? And it's an overview of not only what our work, but the issues that are caused by genderism in Canada. I'd like to introduce you to a few of the characters in our Canadian genderist rogues gallery. But before that, here's some background. So genderism in Canada is being driven by our government, and our government seems to be driven by international financial companies like BlackRock, the McKinsey company, who have decided that of all of their stakeholders, the TQ plus ones are the most important. So the Canadian government has budgeted $100 million over the next 5 years to develop and implement their 2S LGBTQI plus action plan that they came up with. 2S LGBTQI plus, incidentally, is the official term. And, I'm interested, is there any government in the world using a more kind of cockamamie acronym? I'd sure like to know. I bet you we're number one. Okay, right from the official website, there it is. The action plan will do a few things, okay? It's going to prioritize and sustain 2S LGBTQI+. Okay, we know that. It's going to continue to advance and strengthen 2S LGBTQI+ rights at home and abroad. Now, this is funny because to me, this seems like cultural imperialism. And I'm not sure if you know, but in Canada, we do a lot of sort of public atoning for our colonial past. So that's sort of discordant. And here it says, including by building on the criminalization of, and it's tempting to see the word women here, even though that's not what it says, because, we can see how the legacy media is sort of helping the regime to do this, right? They're doggedly setting the stage to condition Canadians to accept this sort of future criminalization of dissidents. And if you think that the official opposition party is going to help us, well, I tell you that I was watching the House of Commons question time. I think it was the last one from March 8th. And yeah, they're not going to help us. There was no pushback at all from the official opposition. So I don't know. We're not happy or surprised to see that word. Okay. Moving on. It's going to support Indigenous 2S LGBTQI+. And you want to know how? By placing the 2S to represent the two-spirit people at the front of the acronym. Okay, now some problems facing Indigenous Canadians are poverty, racism, violence, access to clean drinking water, access to healthcare. This blows my mind. No doubt they're going to appreciate having pride of place in the acronym. Like, what? Until all those other problems are resolved? It's hard to understand. It's almost, yeah. Anyhow, moving on. They're going to embed 2S LGBTQI+ issues in the work of the government, which means that every bureaucrat and public servant will have to quit being apolitical at work and start embodying the politics of our current regime. Okay, they're going to be forced to implement things that don't make sense, even in the science-based regulatory departments. And every person or place or thing that needs government funding or approval is going to have to do that as well. It's going to prioritize and sustain 2S LGBTQI+. That means more money for the chancellors who aren't ashamed to be experts in nonsense, right? If they can get paid for it, it's the microaggressions. They're going to strengthen 2S LGBTQI+ data and evidence-based policymaking, which no, it's not. It's going to destroy data collection because the genderists don't even want correctional services to record the sex of offenders anymore. Sorry, it's going to engage everyone in Canada in fostering a more inclusive future. That means we're all going to be indoctrinated. That's what that bit means. So, those are the fertile grounds in which we sow our gender seeds. Let's see. So now for the Rogues Gallery. First is Faye Johnstone, who recently made international headlines for being called a woman on a chocolate bar wrapper in celebration of International Women's Day, of course. Last December, he gave an address about the Montreal massacre. So that was when this man murdered 14 female students at l'École Polytechnique for being women, really. And, this kind of insult is happening all the time in Canada now. They find some man to come and talk about his pain on these occasions. And it's actually really insulting, and it's gross. It makes me pretty upset. Anyhow, Faye Johnstone is the executive director of a consulting firm that has received more than $1 million from the government, okay, to talk about microaggressions. It's lucrative, people. Anyways, so he gets a platform from our legacy media to lie about how scary Canada is for him, right? And how much hate there is. So he is a self-proclaimed white settler from a middle-class family. He calls himself that. But this kind of irony is lost on Canadians. It's lost on our media, right? So the white middle-class settlers get $1 million, and Indigenous communities get what? Like mercury poisoning and the 2S right at the beginning of the acronym. Like, you know, am I going crazy? It's too crazy. Sorry. Okay. So Gender Dissent published this called Fairy Tales. It gives kind of an overview of what he's been up to. It says 2, but actually it was kind of a collaboration between 3 women. So Toni Vonk is one of our core team members. She's a great and passionate writer, totally dedicated. And, you know, Maureen Sullivan is just this woman full of skills who I think is a recent activist like many of us, right? Like yesterday she was a civilian, but then, you know, she was mobilized and now she's writing, and I don't think she's ever going to shut up. She's wonderful. And so this features a letter from Esme V, who is one of the founding members of CAUSBAR. And she's an old campaigner at this point. She wrote a complaint letter to the Canadian Standards Broadcast Council on behalf of CAUSBAR to take issue with the brainwashing, okay, our legacy media is doing, right? The way they're using people who say they're trans to repeat hate, 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 till every Canadian believes it. And then Toni and Maureen expand on his back-to-back failures in trying to inflame the masses, right? Control public opinion. So I don't know, maybe it's not working. Maybe Canadians aren't buying genderism as much as I think. And I don't know, touch wood, right? I just want to add that in my illustration for this piece, see, I borrowed from a really old picture of a man who has intruded into a fairy ring. You know, like, why are they all called fae? That's what I think. So, you know, this is obviously a way for people for me to metabolize these kind of feelings and thoughts that I'm experiencing in this great gaslighting. Okay, next. Another rogue in our gallery was recently exposed by our own Eva Kurilova. Eva is such a joy to work with, you know, that's why everyone wants to work with her, right? Oh, and she's also Canada's preeminent lesbian. So funny. And this piece was really cathartic to me. It did me good. It was funny. She's funny. This fellow, Marnie Panas, he's quite similar to Faye Johnstone. He's a gender activist, right? He can barely function for all the hatred and violence of Canadian society. And yet he manages to be quite effective, you know, in transgressing our boundaries. And he was voted a champion of inclusion, even though, you know, he's a relative baby, okay? He was born as a woman at the age of 42. Eva dug up so much about Marnie. Here, what did I write from her article? Panas attended an Everyone Can Pee rally at the Alberta legislature. Oh, these people are cloaked in glory. And my image shows Marnie curtsying like a prima ballerina. And those are woke cookies, by the way. That's sort of my corny attempt to reach out to the youth. Gender Dissent. So, you know, it's full of rogues. But the last one I want to mention here was written about recently by our core member, Blue Jay. If you don't have Blue Jays in, you know, your part of the world, they're these beautiful, smart, noisy birds. You know, they collect acorns, lots of acorns. So the next rogue is actually a departmental agency of the government that used to be called Status of Women. And as such, it did us a lot of good. But in 2017, the Trudeau government changed its name to Women and Gender Equality, or WAGE. It also changed the mandate. You can probably guess how, right? Yeah, it changed the mandate. And now the definition of women is all people who identify as women. So that's, subjective. That's what it is. This piece is really something, and I hope that anyone wondering about how we came to this crazy state in Canada will actually go and read it, right? It's full of Blue Jays acorns, statistics, links, charts. It just lays everything out. And well done to Blue Jay for that. That was fantastic. I have nothing to say about this image, except that I'm disappointed that JT, Justin Trudeau, isn't as handsome on the inside as he is on the outside. And, I don't want to fight with gender dissent anymore. Okay. That's what I think about that one. Okay. So let's see what else. Okay. So there's a lot of exposés on gender dissent, but I don't want to spend time with them. I want to move on to some of the actual heroes that we've worked with, in this resurgent women's movement. And so this is Heather Mason. Okay, she's like Canada's Amie. She's an advocate for incarcerated women, and she's just fearless and relentless. She's an amazing woman. She took the initiative to ask female prisoners about their experiences being locked up with these gender men, right? And so she wrote to them, and they replied anonymously. They all have to be anonymous. You heard from Amie, they have to be anonymous. And so here are their testimonials, all anonymous, like the women have to be. We have these testimonials in English and French. A wonderful one volunteered to translate these for us. So they're the prison letters, or lettres de prison. Now, Heather, this is a quote of Heather's. It blows my mind how many people don't know that federally sentenced women can have their children under 4 live with them. By advocating for self-ID, you are not only putting women at risk, but their children as well, right? We have mother-child programs in women's federal prisons. They're good for mothers, they're good for children, and they're good for society, right? And they're being threatened by these kind of dangerous gender men. We need to write this story. Please reach out if you want to. I just want to mention that Heather contributed the foreword to this groundbreaking paper from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute about this subject of men and women's prisons in Canada. I mean, I hope it does break up the ground, which is, it just seems hopeless now, but hopefully it'll do some good. Okay, next hero. Linda Blade was the subject of a recent piece by Tony Vonk. Again, our wonderful Tony. Linda is this unstoppable advocate for women and girls. She's contributed so much to this movement. She's just very brave and full of integrity. Now, she's one of the co-founders of the ICFS, which is the International Consortium for Female Sport. It's an international lobby group to advocate for the preservation of female sports categories. And in that capacity, she organized an action, 19 women wearing signs that said XX does not equal XY, bought tickets to a female powerlifting competition in which, of course, a man was going to compete. Now, he had been threatening, threatening to withdraw because of hate and violence, right? But he didn't. And hilarity ensued, at least for me, right? Like, you have to watch the video of these poor, foolish men who were there representing the venue where the powerlifting was being held and the sport. They were trying to turf out our women who were just sitting nicely at the back, quietly supporting female athletes only. It's almost like those men were being transphobic or something, right? Like, how could they tell the difference? Anyhow, my image, it reflects my love and respect for Linda Blade. She's amazing. And you know what? She also contributed to another groundbreaking paper by the MacDonald-Laurier Institute, but this one is about keeping women's sport for women. So please look for that too. Okay, so we have some wonderful regular contributors that, I want to say that we really appreciate. Robin Singer is a woman who is devoted to ending child mutilation and indoctrination. I don't think she ever thought she'd be doing this, but she's been extremely prolific, and I'm sure she's working on something right now. And, she's just not going to give up until this is over. I know that. So thank you to Robin. Aline Cogmier is a real bona fide film analyst. She's a real feminist, and she's a great and versatile writer. I think you can read her on Feminist Current and 4W Pub. Who else has she written for? Maybe for the 11th Hour blog, I think. Anyhow, wherever you find her, please read her. She's given us some great pieces for our arts and culture section. Next, Dr. Kathleen Lowry. This isn't her most recent piece, but you know what? Since there's this Netflix documentary right now about this subject, tribes in the Amazon, and the men who went there to try to, figure them out and study them. I thought that if anyone who's interested should read her piece and watch the Netflix, take them together. It's really fascinating. And her recent piece was well worth reading too. It's about academics not reading, funnily enough. She's wonderful. I didn't highlight any of Felicia Rembrandt's pieces here, but you know what? As our editor, she's touched all of them. She's prolific and she's a masterful writer, and she reads beautifully. So I hope that you'll check out her work too. And if you decide to pitch to us, then you'll meet her. I just want to mention there are other women-run websites that I love, womenarehuman.com and redux.info, Redux with 2 X's. And I'd have to say that Anna Slatz of Redux is just this fabulous genius. And she's been so incredibly generous to us at Gender Dissent. And also, this isn't a grassroots publication, and I don't think it's women-run. But if you read the post-millennial column by Mia Ashton, you'll thank me because she's uncompromising. She's a great writer. It's very cathartic. So, if we are looking for your stories of genderism in Canada, we appreciate them, and our readers do too. Like, they say nice things sometimes, like, we're a lifeline. That's true. Somebody said that. I'm almost done. I just want to leave with some messages from the team, quotes from the team. Eva Kurilova says, she says, this is in regard to writing for us. She says, "You don't have to be scared. We'll help." And Tony Vonk says, "Hell no, I did not expect to be part of any underground effort. I'm truly inspired by the horror we see happening." And Blue Jay says, "The craziest thing about what we've written is that it's all true." And Felicia says, "We're here to address an emergency." So that's not the cheeriest thing to leave you with. So I'll add that if you write something, I will be as excited as if you were Martha Gellhorn, okay? And I'll make you a picture. So that's all for me. Thanks very much.
We're going to go on to right over the other side of the world now. We're going to go to Australia to a couple of recorded videos. And the first one is from Samara, and she is a trans widow. Now, her use of language is different from WDI's. So she uses some of the terms that we would not agree with. So sort of men who say that they're women would be our preferred term. And then Janet Fraser will talk about who said self-ID would be a good idea. We'll go on to that one afterwards. So
Samara is a 35-year-old mother of 1. After a 7-year relationship, she was told by her soon-to-be ex-husband that he was now a woman and wished to continue a lesbian marriage with her. Samara will now share her story about how she navigated a tumultuous separation following her husband's revelation and how it impacted her.
Hello everybody, my name is Samara. I'm a 35-year-old mother to a 2-year-old son. My husband came out as a transgender woman in 2022. Let's call him Jack, not his real name. I remember the night he came out. It was a Sunday night. Jack had been complaining for almost 2 years at that time that I hadn't been giving him enough love and attention. So let's remember our son is 2. So no matter how much I tried over those 2 years, it was never enough. That night, I had just put our son to bed. Jack and I watched a TV show in bed, something I didn't really want to do, but I did to spend more time with Jack. After the TV show finished, around 9:30 p.m, he gave me his laptop with a Word document opened on the screen. He said he had laryngitis that night, which made it difficult for him to speak, so he had typed a letter for me. A letter telling me that he was transgender and wished to become a woman. And at that time, he said he had felt it for a couple of weeks. So my stomach sank. I didn't really understand what transgender meant at that time. I had heard of the term transgender, but I had no idea. I had never heard of terms such as cross-sex hormones, top surgery, bottom surgery, any of that at that time. And this was only last year as well. My first question to Jack was, what's going to happen to us? He said nothing would change. It's quite laughable now, looking back. How could he say he wanted to become a woman and that nothing would change between us as husband and wife? I knew at that moment that our marriage was over. He spoke about his eagerness to start female hormones because he wanted to change his body shape and grow breasts. That was his goal. He talked about how this was the answer he had been seeking all his life. It was the answer to all his problems and how we could be closer than ever. I was genuinely scared that he was going to coerce me into acts that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to be intimate with, quote unquote, a woman. I thought about what this meant for our son and how it could and would impact him. Something Jack clearly didn't think about. So that was a Sunday night. Jack didn't give me 24 hours to digest the news before he started changing his appearance. The very next day, I came home from work to find him wearing female clothes, a new hairdo, painted nails, body hair all removed, and eyebrow sculptured and new eyelash extensions. He also smelled of women's perfume. A few days later, he rehashed his entire wardrobe with women's clothes. I found his silicone breasts and lacy underwear and bras in the house. So much for nothing would change. It wasn't just the physical changes, it was his personality too, to some extent. Some things I probably should have seen a long time ago, but some things he did change in terms of his personality. He said I should try to be intimate with him as a transgender woman to see if I like it. Then there were endless demands for my support and validation, wanting to know how I liked his new hairdo or what I thought of his new outfit or his freshly painted nails. He couldn't or wouldn't see how it affected me or why it was upsetting me. When he didn't get the validation he wanted from me, he sought comfort elsewhere, namely the internet. You see, initially when Jack came out, he said he had gender dysphoria. And remember, he said he had felt it for a couple of weeks at the time. So I looked it up. A few weeks later, I asked him about his gender dysphoria because when I Googled the definition, I found that gender dysphoria is something you had to have felt for at least 6 months. A low bar, but still, he didn't even meet that. So his response to that was that he didn't have gender dysphoria after all, but he was simply trans. And if you say you're trans, you're trans. So apparently people can be transgender without having gender dysphoria, something I still don't understand to this date. It didn't matter to him how I felt or how our son might be impacted by all of this. Jack put me down regularly. He called me crazy and bigoted. He had mood swings, especially anger when I didn't affirm him as a woman. He demanded I engage in circular arguments about his gender identity. One time, because I said I didn't want to discuss it with him at that time because I was working from home, he abruptly unplugged my computer while I was working, demanding I talk to him right then and there. He threatened to unalive himself on more than one occasion, saying his only options were to live as a woman or to not live at all. Like many others who have been in my situation, of course I tried therapy. I tried both couples and individual for this particular issue. Most mental health professionals were all too happy to affirm him. His pronouns were the main thing of concern, not the mental health of his or mine. What was needed from me was acceptance and tolerance. I struggled to find a therapist who wasn't wrapped up in the gender ideology, even just to support myself through the separation. I have found a good therapist now, all the way from Western Australia, who is a gender critical woman, and she's lovely. So it didn't take me long to end the marriage, especially after Jack physically assaulted me in front of our son for not affirming his female identity. My son and I moved out of the family home. After couch surfing for a few months, we have now found a rental to call our home. To this day, Jack firmly believes that he has done nothing wrong or anything to contribute to our separation. He blames me for the entire separation. According to him, the separation and the dismantle of our family unit is entirely my fault. Everything negative was always my fault, a common theme in our entire relationship now that I look back. I have since connected with a few other trans widows in Australia and overseas. It is remarkable how similar all our stories are. The blueprint that these men operate on is all the same. So some of the common themes I've noticed are, and this is certainly true for Jack, it's almost always when something big has happened in the relationship where the man is no longer the center of attention. So for example, having a child, perhaps losing their job, or the wife receiving a life-threatening, life-altering medical diagnosis. So that's when these inner women come out. They all seem to have narcissistic personality traits. They're very self-centered and self-invested, very obvious. They all seem to be on the autism spectrum a little bit. They are perpetrators of emotional and mental abuse, even well before the transition. They are master manipulators, and some of them escalate to physical violence, like it did in my case. Most, not all, but anecdotally, most of these men work in IT or are very tech savvy. And often they don't have many, if any, real life friends. They tend to have secret online lives and, of course, consume porn, something Jack hid very well from me. I still suffer mental trauma from being put down and invalidated so often, not just during Jack's transition, but during my entire relationship with Jack. It's not easy being a single mother. I juggle my career and caring for a toddler all by myself. Financially, I am significantly worse off. He drained our accounts with his erratic spending during the relationship, which I found out progressively got worse towards the end. And divorce is very expensive, especially when it involves a person with narcissistic personality traits. I am concerned about what my son will make of all this as he gets older. My fear is that he will be unduly influenced by his father. However, I am determined to do the best I can to guide my son in the right direction. I am sharing my story with you all today so that more people are aware of the destruction that these men leave behind. Often the partners and children of adult transitioners are ignored. We need better mental health services that don't centre around gender ideology. So next time you hear of an adult person coming out as transgender, please think of their partners, parents, their children, and how they might be impacted. Think of how many lives are turned upside down by selfish choices of one person. Thank you for listening.
So we're going to hear now from Janet Fraser, and the title of her talk is "Who Said Self-ID Would Be a Good Idea?"
I'm the National Convener of the Australian Home Birth Network Joyous Birth for the last nearly 20 years, and I have been a very angry feminist activist for about 30-something years now. I've been addressing rallies and conferences on this topic for a few years now and have watched the progress of medicalising children with great alarm. We have not yet come to the depths of what will be achieved by the activist doctors in Australia. They still basically have free rein. The propaganda which promotes the wrong body narrative is being given to younger and younger children, preschoolers to primary aged kids, via our national broadcaster and many other media outlets. It is undeniable, except by those with a vested interest, that children are being recruited to justify and normalise the existence of autogynephilic males, to retrospectively provide these men with an imaginary pathway from childhood which seeks to naturalise their fetishised public demonstrations. The only glimpse of hope on the horizon in the courts is a recent case where parents agreed not to deny their child a normal puberty, and the interesting public comments made by their solicitor may indicate some light being shone in the dark places of these clinics at last. You will notice that every story intended to convince us of the existence of children in the imaginary category called trans starts with a statement about the child failing to embrace sex stereotypes forced upon it by adults. While this should be completely unremarkable, since sex stereotypes have long been recognised as harmful, for a disturbingly large group of people, this can now result in medicalising a child and preventing their sexual and psychological maturation. Agents which can suppress puberty are originally intended for use by adult women to manage symptoms of endometriosis and fibroids. They are employed in adult males to suppress hormones while managing advanced prostate cancer, but also as the colloquially named chemical castration in sex offenders. They are used on occasion for the rare medical issue of precocious puberty in very young children. They have never been licensed for use as suppressing agents in adolescents to indefinitely prevent normal puberty, and the full effects of this iatrogenic process are not explained to families or the child involved. As Michael Biggs noted in 2022, the original study used to normalise puberty suppression in physically healthy adolescents, the so-called Dutch protocol, was based on only 70 adolescents and has proven to be a baseless rationale for the notions it's used to justify. While the doublespeak of the activists tries to portray preventing puberty as temporary, a pause button, or somehow psychologically therapeutic, the actual effect of this is to sterilise the child. Puberty performs many functions in humans, though the primary function is to begin the process of sexual maturation and fertility. Preventing puberty results in a child who never reaches this stage of normal human development. There simply is no good reason to promote the sterilisation of kids, many of whom are autistic, victims of trauma and bullying, or would likely grow up to be lesbian, gay or bisexual. No child is born in the wrong body. To borrow from Michelle O'Donnell, this is a diagnosis in search of a disease. All over the world, the same bad medicine has been used to justify this iatrogenic process. The Dutch protocol was financed by Ferring, the company which makes triptorelin. Triptorelin is commonly used to prevent puberty in Australian children to this day. To our eyes now, with the benefit of hindsight, the Dutch protocol could appear conservative. They only prevented puberty in 7 children under the age of 16 by the year 2000. Today, children as young as 9 are started on these drugs. We know that 96 to 98% of children in whom puberty is prevented go on to receive artificial hormones. This is a cascade of interventions ranging from the initial social transition of pretending the child is the opposite sex, all the way through to castration, double mastectomy and hysterectomy. By 1999, the promoters of the idea in gender identity in children knew that most would outgrow it and be lesbian, gay or bisexual. They just began leaving that information out over time, so the current invention of the trans child became possible. Of the 70 minors in the Dutch protocol study, 62 were same-sex attracted. 1 was heterosexual. The same doctor who recommended preventing puberty in these teens also recommended the same drugs for males with persistent sexual obsessions and paraphilias, though with the proviso that it may prove very uncomfortable owing to side effects. He did not make this warning for the adolescents. Men being chemically castrated are typically on these drugs for less time than young children due to human rights and health concerns. We never hear the full reality of the Dutch protocol. 8 patients refused to participate in the final review or were ineligible for the surgeries performed upon the others. 1 died from necrotising fasciitis because, as we saw with Jazz Jennings, suppression of normal puberty led to his penis remaining the size of a small child's. So the surgeons used some of his intestine, which became seriously infected and killed him. There was follow-up from this cohort of a 35-year-old woman described as not regretting her bodily alterations, but also still scoring very high on a test for depression and being unable to sustain an intimate relationship owing to shame and embarrassment at the state of her genitals. Questioned again at 48, her life had improved and she was maintaining a relationship with another woman. But at what cost? Since this is obviously despite the alterations to her mind and body. It is of considerable concern that we have no real way of measuring the numbers of children in Australia who are being given puberty-suppressing agents and then moving to opposite-sex hormones. The gender clinics do not record what happens to the kids who reach the age of 18 in their service, and those moving on to hormones are routinely referred to private endocrinologists whose books are not available to us via FOI. Diana Kenny noted in her empirical data collection covering 2014 to 2019 the numbers of children having puberty suppressed continues to grow before they're lost to the wild west of prescribing of private endocrinologists. Queensland figures are particularly stark, 6 times higher, in fact, than the nearest similar state, with significantly more children enrolled than other states, even the more populous New South Wales. Given that we know suppressing puberty is the first chemical step in the cascade of intervention towards genital surgeries, this is deeply concerning. We really need whistleblowers in Australia from clinics and private offices. So it is perhaps not insignificant that one of the more publicly discussed cases of a child having puberty suppressed comes from Queensland in 2022. A teenager, the judgment describes as, quote, born what would commonly be referred to as female, but identifies as male, end quote. In this case, Gillick competence was again a focus, given that it is one of the legal tests for whether a child is mature enough to consent to a medical treatment. What I have often suggested is that believing one is the opposite sex in the face of evidence to the contrary should manifest in a finding of incompetence. This judgment, however, relates the girl's reported persistence in her belief as the basis for her competence. It is also noted that the girl is on the autism spectrum, and in a flash of commendable insight, she wondered herself if she may feel dislocated from her body as a result. But the judgment makes no comment other than to relate this. Curious. Given the circular nature of this diagnosis in search of a disease, it comes as no surprise that the child is described as, and this is a quote, I don't want anyone to think I would ever write this sentence, medical practitioners in a way which is consistent with the conclusion that the child has a considered understanding of what it means to feel like the child feels and why it is that the child wants to have this treatment. The frightening aspect of this case, it's not the only one, is the judge's decision to invoke the parens patriae power of the court. Coming to us from 1,000 years of jurisprudence, parens patriae is part of equitable jurisdiction and exercised by judges of the Supreme Courts. It is a far-reaching, potentially limitless power which provides the court with greater power even than parents. It can be invoked in matters relating to education, indefinite protective detention, surgical procedures, abortion, involuntary hospitalisation, and more besides. It is intended to be exercised only in exceptional cases. And it is intended to be weighed against the liberty of the child in question, resulting in the greater onus on the court to exercise caution. In this case, the child's father opposes medicalising her and the mother supports it. So the court, in invoking this jurisdiction, clearly disregards the father's view and supersedes the mother's by supporting her wishes but giving a far more powerful voice to them. If greater caution is supposed to be exercised when a child's liberty is at stake, it seems curious to condemn a child to lifelong medical captivity for the sake of an ideology. As I mentioned earlier, we do have one blip in the seamless progression by activists intent on removing parental responsibility and condemning children to needless medicalisation. A case we assume is in Victoria, but only from the presence of a Victorian solicitor, apparently had the most lengthy and balanced discussion of puberty suppressing agents thus far in any case. The case of Re-Imogen in 2019, a mother attempted to introduce expert evidence on the harm of ideological iatrogenic interventions, but was largely prevented. The sources promoting the harm outnumbered her witnesses by 10 to 1. But in the recent case, not only was there genuine evidence provided and seen by the court, the parents eventually came to an agreement that the child's development was to be left intact until at least the age of 16. Given that we know puberty is the cure for most children who experience a sense of dislocation from their normal bodies, this child has more of a chance at reaching adulthood with an intact body than most. It may provide some hope to other parents struggling with the reach of this cult and the deep pockets of the activist lawyers that a child might yet go through legal proceedings and be provided a rational outcome. Another positive step has been brought to my attention only this morning. There is to be a meeting of Headspace staff, including concerned parents about gender medicine and the push to medicalise children. GP Dr Tyler Schofield in Newcastle is seeking submissions from parents and children harmed by GPs or others under the auspices of this government-funded body. Please contact him if your child fits this description. Management is also keen to hear from you. All the challenges the gender identity industry poses to our society are frightening. We are being forced to accept fraudulent government papers as normal. We are being told that refusing to admit men to women's single-sex spaces is violent bigotry. We are being told that we must pretend some babies are being born to men. And we are being asked to believe that some children are a special category to whom lifelong medicalisation, sterilisation, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis and restricted brain maturation is preferable to them simply growing up within the normal parameters of human development. These children are being sterilised and mutilated. They are being surgically and psychologically harmed. Every opportunity you get to tell someone who doesn't yet realise what this actually means, you should grab it. Speak up for these kids, because so far most doctors and politicians are either too scared or just as culpable in this medical scandal as the activist doctors and judges. Thank you.